Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the normal weekend review show. We will walk through the top 10 for the weekend of September 14th through the 16th, 2018. We'll do some deeper dives on the wide releases like The Predator, A Simple Favor, and White Boy Rick. I'll briefly mention Unbroken, Path to Redemption, even though I don't want to. And then we'll talk a little bit about maybe some limited releases. There's not a lot out. We'll probably do some follow-up on movies outside the top 10. And then we will talk about what's going to happen for the rest of September and maybe hint at what's coming up for October. So let's dive into the top 10 here. Coming in at number one, to nobody's surprise, was The Predator. The reboot from Shane Black came in at $24 million for the weekend, which is not great, let's be honest. Even as recent as yesterday and on Friday, it was looking more like 25, 26, maybe 27. And it just kind of got a little bit worse as the weekend went on. And when we take a look at the audience reactions, we will see why that happens. It was opened in over 4,000 theaters, so a super saturated wide release. And the real story here is that per theater average was just shy of $6,000 per theater, which for a wide release opener like this, with an $88 million production budget, which it did have, not good at all. Something went wrong here, and we'll try and pick that apart as we go through the numbers and some more of the detail. But just sort of highlight stuff: $88 million production budget, $120 million marketing budget. Keep that in mind. We'll get back to that in a bit. It was mostly front-loaded. The opening night, it did pretty well. The expectation from that opening night was, okay, maybe it could get to 30, possibly, but it just could not leg it out. And I think a lot of that has to do with the word of mouth reaction to the film, which has been very, very poor. Critics hated this film, 34% in Rotten Tomatoes. Audience score, and like I said, take it with a grain of salt, is like about 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. I sort of noticed what I usually do when a new wide release open comes out. I don't really care that much about plot, so I'll go into like Reddit and Rotten Tomatoes and just see what people are actually saying about it, and Letterboxd as well, because I want to get a feel for what's happening, because you get these numbers that roll in, but word of mouth is often very anecdotal, and how people pass along their opinion of the film really does count a lot. And so I went on, I think Reddit first, the R Movies subforum, and every weekend they have a discussion thread. And if you pop in there, you can see what people are saying. Some people, there's some spoilers, so you have to be pretty careful if you care about plot. I don't. And so I went in and looked, and you can tell almost immediately, as of like Thursday night, Friday morning, that the reaction to the film was incredibly poor. And I don't just mean like, oh, like whatever, it's not that great. There is a lot of vitriol in these responses, how poorly it was edited, how terrible it looked. And that kind of blows my mind based on who was involved. And, you have Fox, you have Shane Black, you have basically a $90 million production budget here, backed by $120 million worldwide marketing budget. This is not T-ball. Like, this is major leagues here. And the fact that the film came out so terribly, not only based on what the critics are saying, but based on what the audience is saying, hints to a major problem at Fox with the production of this movie. And I'm not sure, obviously, because I wasn't there. I don't have the inside scoop yet what happened, but something went terribly wrong. Because the product here is not good. Just to give you an example of some stuff, these are a couple things I came across on the Rotten Tomato audience score. Sometimes people write, they write half a star and then they write the review. But I'll read a couple to you, just kind of give you an idea of what the sort of anecdotal word of mouth is. This one person gave it a half star. This movie was by far the worst addition to the Predator franchise. I get that the film industry just became a cash grab of what shithole movie you can pump out and attach a better older movie's background to, but this one was absurd. The entire movie was awful, but the last act fell off a fucking cliff. Who the hell edited this? I felt like Alien vs. Predator was a better inclusion of Predator lore and background than this POS. Don't bother giving your hard-earned money to this monstrosity. Very typical response I'm hearing from people. It's not just they disliked it, right? It's not just, oh, I was bored. Oh, it wasn't that great. It was, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life. Another half-star review, Rotten Tomatoes, from an audience member. Absolutely terrible. Had some funny moments, but other than that, it was horrendous. Bad dialogue, bad story, terrible editing, 90s CGI. It's no surprise to me that this movie was directed by the guy who made Iron Man 3. Save your money and pirate this film if you really want to watch it. Olivia Munn is hot, though. That's the end of the review, which is your typical internet review. So, okay, so we'll take a little bit of a step back. C+ cinema score. So not good. The same as Predators, but C+ cinema score is terrible. It's not good at all. Post track, which is from ComScore, 3 stars was the score, 66% overall positive, which is not a nightmare, but a pretty low 52% definite recommend rating on that. So what happened here is we have a lot of problems. One, the film itself is terrible. I think objectively you can say that. That doesn't mean you can't get something good out of it, but as a collective group opinion, critics ravished it with a 34% Rotten Tomatoes, and audiences have essentially hated it. And you can see that as the numbers throughout the weekend started going down and down. What's happening there is they expected to do this much on Saturday, and then all of a sudden it doesn't do that much. And then when it doesn't do that much on Saturday, they think, oh crap, like Sunday's going to be worse. This might come in actuals below 24. That's going to be my guess. I think it probably comes in at like 23, 22.5 tomorrow afternoon when the real numbers come in. So that was a big problem, right? Like the actual product itself. You know, I usually break this stuff down, right? Product quality, product conception, marketing quality, and marketing quantity, you know, or how do they market it, you know, what platforms and stuff like that. So we take that sort of really quick post-mortem here. The product quality is terrible. There's no really way you can argue it any differently. It's not good. The product conception, so that's sort of why are we doing another Predator movie? Why is Shane Black directing? You know, Shane Black has sort of been in and out of favor in Hollywood. He'll like do something like Iron Man 3 and people hate him. Then he has Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and then he does The Nice Guys, which is a great movie. A little weird. There's a weirdness to it that I can't really pinpoint, but it's a really fun, interesting film. That got him sort of back in favor again. And The Predator, you know, is a big franchise to reboot. I do wonder, he also wrote the original Predator back in the day in 87. And so you do kind of have to wonder, you know, why such a big production budget? Why Shane Black? Because he hasn't really proven himself on sort of the blockbuster level that he could really pull it off. And I think they took a chance here, and I think I went really wrong. I want a whole book about the production of this film, because it just seems like there's a lot of hands in the pot and there's a lot of studio quote unquote interference, but probably they gave Shane Black a lot of leeway. And it sounds like he kind of fucked it up, to be honest with you. You know, if you kind of like situate the Predator now, it's going to open at, let's see, it's actually, I'm looking at the, it's saying $24 million, but I'm getting another, maybe the estimate was lower than this. I'm trying, because there's some confusion about the number. I'm seeing 23.7 on another website. Weird. Okay, so the product quality was terrible. Product conception, we got to think this is the 6th Predator movie. It's the first one in, 8 years, because Predators came out in 2010. And if you look back over the series, let's do that really quick just to put it in context, because I think that's important. The original Predator came out in 1987. That opened up at $28 million, closed out at $141. Those are adjusted numbers for inflation. So you look back, Predator, it's funny because you think about Predator, and especially as someone who grew up in the 80s and was born in the 80s and saw Predator on TV throughout the 90s, the entire decade, it did not have the cachet that it does now. Back when it came out, it was a big hit. Everybody loved it. They did a sequel in 1990 that didn't do very well at all. But the original movie has always sort of been kind of like beloved by people from the 80s, but it wasn't until the 80s revival where it became like considered higher art. Because in the 80s and 90s, it was just like this stupid action movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the Get to the Chopper meme didn't exist really yet. They didn't have memes, I guess. And so it didn't really become this like cultural icon, I would say, until the mid 2000s, right around when Alien versus Predator came out. because that's when I think younger generation discovered it, and sort of reevaluated it as like, okay, yeah, it is kind of schlocky, high gloss action movie, but there's something really invigorating about it. It's just so well done. The narrative works. It's like an exciting, over the top, really engaging movie. And I think it just it's the perception of Predator changed a lot from when I was a teenager. Nobody, when I was growing up going to high school in like the late 90s, gave a shit about the Predator. Like they wouldn't even think about it. And then fast forward 10 years and all of a sudden Predator is like the greatest movie ever. It's great. It's a totally like night and day sort of reaction to it. And so based on that sort of, I think, revivalism of the 80s and 80s action films, that's when we get Alien versus Predator. Before that, Predator 2 opened up at 19, closed out at 67, didn't even make half of what the original did 3 years prior in 1987. So basically what happened, Predator does really well, Predator 2 kind of falls apart. I have a really soft spot for Predator 2. Danny Glover, Gary Busey, takes place in Los Angeles in the city. I don't know. There's something really bonkers about that movie that I love, but it's not a good film and did not do very well. So then you have Alien versus Predator, which came out in 2004, kind of that revival period that I'm talking about with the 80s and 80s action movies. That does amazing. Opens up at 57. Closes out at 119. Terrible multiplier. Like horrific multiplier. Barely gets a 2x multi. Obviously what happened there, the movie's terrible and nobody really liked it, but people showed up for it because people were really excited about Alien vs. Predator. Then you have this sequel to that. What blows my mind about that is like, if you're a studio executive, right, you're at Fox and you say, oh my God, Alien vs. Predator, we thought it was going to open up at like 25, it opens up at 57, then closes out at 119. Wouldn't you say to yourself, hey, look, we kind of got away with one here. This thing opened up at 57 and it closed barely over 2x multiplier. Like, okay, let's like, we pressed our luck as much as we can. Like, let's not do a sequel because the original was terrible and no one's going to show up for the second one because they're going to feel burnt by the original Alien vs. Predator. And that's exactly what happened. Alien vs. Predator closed out at 119, opened at 57. Alien vs. Predator Requiem, which came out in December 2007, opened up at 13 and closed out at 54. So Alien vs. Predator Requiem ran for 2-3 months, closed out lower than the 3-day opening weekend total of Alien vs. Predator. I mean, that's just like a huge mistake from Fox, especially a Christmas release. What are they thinking? Okay, so that brings us to 2007. The last Predator movie was Predators, came out in 2010, opened up at 29, did 62. Again, a really good opening for that film, but the multiplier is around 2x, so terrible. There's something about these movies that are either like super front loaded or there's just a hardcore fan base that goes out to see them and then no one else wants to see it. That bodes very poorly for the Predator, very, very poorly, because if it's opening up at 24, it's going to struggle to get to 60, it sounds like, and that's horrific news for Fox and the people who made this movie. It's just, I think, I started this whole rant about the Predator talking about product conception. Like, product quality is terrible. We've established that. Product conception, I think there was probably an opportunity to reboot the Predator series. The last 4 Predator movies are not good. I think the thought here was that, like, let's tap into the original Predator, which came out in 1987 with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jesse Ventura, 2 future governors. Let's try and tap back into that. And they thought, let's get Shane Black because he's coming off The Nice Guys, which is a great movie everybody loves. It's already kind of an instant cult classic. No one went to go see it in the movie theater, but it's like, it's played very well on HBO, on the streaming services and VOD and all that. So, they might have signed them up before that anyways. But you get Shane Black from the original and try to recapture some of that magic. I get the conception here. I really do. The problem is this. You spent way too much money on it. The last Predator movie had a $35 million production budget. I wouldn't let this one go past 50. There's no reason to. I know you got the CGI. I know you got all this stuff. That's one of the reasons, too, why the CGI is probably not that great. If you're comparing this CGI to the $200 million Avengers Infinity War, or probably $300 million production budget of Infinity War, yeah, it's not going to be the same, right? So I think from a conception standpoint, they needed to pare this concept back way back, and I think they could have done a great movie reboot. So it's not necessarily the idea of doing another Predator movie that I think is where they erred. I think it was the scale and the scope of that film where they erred pretty significantly. It was just too expensive, and I think they were pushing it way too hard with a $120 million worldwide marketing budget. I mean, what they really needed here was a super high quality, smaller film that, you don't have to do 4,000 screens, do 3,000 screens. Get it out there, make sure the quality is like A+ tier, like A cinema score level, and then you're going to have a winner because your production budget is going to be 40 to 50 million, and you just let that thing run. And if it's good, people will show up and see it for the most part because it has that cachet of the brand and the franchise. So I think that's from the product side of things. So poor product quality, product conception, I think was half wrong. I like the idea of going back to the original a little bit more and rebooting it, but I don't like the way that they did it. From a marketing perspective, pretty much a disaster from the start. The trailers were awful. They looked terrible. Some of the worst trailers I've seen this year. Looked super boring. They certainly spent a ton of money on marketing, like I've mentioned, but the quality wasn't there. And then you had this real massive tonal shift in the trailers. The final trailer looks completely different than the earlier trailers because I think they realized the ship was sinking, and they're like, let's Suicide Squad up this trailer. Let's make it bombastic and crazy and kind of fun. And it just didn't work. It was kind of too little too late. And then you have the whole Olivia Munn sort of PR situation, which, there's not really much to say about it. Shane Black, basically the short of it is Shane Black cast one of his friends in kind of a smaller role who was a registered sex offender. He went to prison, or I guess he went to prison. He pleaded guilty to a felony charge of something. It was like online stuff, like sending an email to a minor, essentially. And then he didn't tell Olivia Munn that this guy was a registered sex offender. She ends up acting in a scene with him. It's in the movie. She gets really upset because she wasn't told. And then there's all of a sudden this PR sort of civil war between the cast members. Olivia Munn thinks nobody's backing her up. Shane Black apologizes. Other people in the cast are like, I don't know what to say. This is awkward. It was a PR disaster, really, is what it comes down to. Did that affect the box office? I think so. Absolutely. They say any press is good press. That's not true at all. I think for this one, it just sort of seemed like it added to the perception that this thing was a train wreck. And it was a train wreck, and that PR sort of civil war that happened just sort of illustrated that to other people who were paying attention that, like, this is a mess, and I'm not going to go pay money to go see this. I think it definitely think it had effect. So overall, what do we say about this? Huge misfire by Fox. Massive misfire. Is it going to make a profit? Deadline quotes a financial person basically saying it could make or lose $30 billion in the end. And they go on to say, basically, this type of spending on a genre film would not have happened under a different tenure at Fox. I think that's a good point, and that's something I brought up earlier. It was way too much money to spend on a movie like this. In terms of who went to go see it, some exit polls, 66% was over 25, 34% was under 25. When you compare that to... that's pretty much in line with the average movie. It seems like it skews older there, but that average movie is about 67, under 25. Over 25, and 33% is under 25. So it's not really that far off from that. In terms of genre breakdown, 62% male, 38% female. That way over indexes on the male. Usually it's about a 51 to 49 split, men at 51, female 49 for the average movie in general. For this one, obviously skewed pretty far to the male direction, which makes sense. So the final word on this that I'll say is that it's a disaster, and I think it's actually a much bigger flop than people are saying in the press about it. Because when I see an $88 million production budget and that massive marketing budget, they had thought that this was going to do really, really well. I think they expected it to open, let's say 6 months ago with their intention. $40-50 million was the expectation, and that's why they pumped all this money into it. Which also confuses me because they saw the test screenings. They know that it's not a good movie. Like they know. And so it's like you would think they would have a better risk management team to be like, hey guys, no, don't spend $120 million to market this movie. I'm going to do some back of the napkin math just to see where it ends up. Let's say it closes out at 60 with a really terrible multiplier, and I think that that's probably the case. Worldwide, then it'll probably be pretty heavily international. So let's just give it the benefit of the doubt and say it does 30% international. 60% international. Now, let's say 70% international. Like, that's probably more likely. So it'll probably pull in about $200 million total worldwide. On the back end with streaming and stuff like that, it'll probably do okay. You're looking at probably $175 million for total revenue on this film. And if you look at total costs, just use the normal stuff that I used before, $88 million, about 3x that is of the cost. Yeah, I'm seeing this more like an $80 to $70 million loss as opposed to a $30 million loss. Like, I think it's a much bigger mistake than people are saying that it is. In any event, it's a big swing and a miss for Fox on this and for Shane Black, and it's too bad. I've never been the biggest fan of the Predator series. I love the original, and I actually really like the sequel that came out in '90. The reboots have just been unwatchable to me. I've seen them all, and I cannot do it. They're so bad. And I think this is just another kind of lame attempt that costs a lot of money to get the Predator series back up the ground. I think they don't understand what made the original so fascinating and interesting. And I think, from what I've heard about this one, it just seems like they don't get it. And I think the audiences are not going to show up for it. So that's Predator. Let's keep on walking through the top 10 here. We'll keep a track on Predator and see what it does for the next few weeks, but I expect it to fall off pretty rapidly here. Number 2 this weekend was The Nun, 18.2 million, a 66% drop. Remember, I talked about the drop a lot last weekend. That's a massive drop for a normal film. For a horror film, you're probably looking at least 55 to 60. Anything above 60 is somewhat abnormal, and 66 is very high. And I talked about why. It's essentially a sequel. The product quality of this, the crowd reaction is not good. It's not a good movie. I watched it. It's just, it has a really good vibe and atmosphere. Just a terrible story that makes basically no sense. Really underwritten main character. It's just not a good movie. And so you'll see that reflected here. It's a horror movie. It's a sequel. It's not a good movie. Cinema score wasn't great. You're going to get a 66% drop. I was thinking more like 68%. We'll see with the actuals tomorrow. I could be right. But this is not good. So it's not really going to go anywhere. But at the same time, you say it's not going to go anywhere. It's already made $85 million. So it's already, once it gets past the $100 million mark, which it will easily, it's already sort of gravy train. It only costs $22 million to make. Compare that to the Predator, right? It cost what, 1/4 exactly of what the Predator costs, and it's probably going to do like what, at least $50-60 million more than the Predator. Like, Warner Brothers and the whole Conjuring universe, they get it. You make a movie for cheap, and if it's not good, and even if you market it correctly, you're gonna make a lot of cash here, and that's what The Nun is. It's essentially kind of, I don't want to say cash grab, but it is. Like, that's what it is. It was just sort of, hey, let's do a movie about the nun because it was in Conjuring 2 and Conjuring. Let's not make it great. Who cares? And it's essentially the kind of vibe of the movie too. It's like, this is not top shelf horror movie. This is like B level, maybe even C level. Kind of feels like D level sometimes when you're watching it. I will say the nice thing about the nun though is it has the polish of a wide release, which not all horror films do. Not all. The Predator actually kind of lacked that a little bit. It has that polish to it, especially the first hour or so. So I think that's why, it engages people. It gives them sort of what they want. It's kind of like if you rate it on kind of like a dinner. The Nun is like going to, I don't know, like Panera. It's like, what you're going to get. It's kind of like a little bit more money than it should be, but you know you're going to be satiated by it. It's going to taste decent, and it's a safe choice. I think that's a lot like a lot of people want to see The Nun. But now, as word gets out that it's not that great, then people aren't going to sort of follow up and see it. People who are kind of on the fence are definitely not going to see it now. Okay, so Nun was 18.2 million, 66% drop, but it's at $85 million in its second weekend, so fantastic performance for that movie. Coming in at number 3 was A Simple Favor, coming in at $16 million. In 3,100 theaters, per theater average was 5,174. This is one of those strange movies that I talked a lot about in the fall movie preview. I didn't really know what it was about. Paul Feig directed, so a big director. Anna Kendrick and Blake Lively as the stars, 2 huge stars. And, rated R sort of, I guess it's noir. There's social media involved. Social media noir is like a new genre it's searching in late August there. So, $20 million production budget. So it wasn't a massive movie. This one was odd just because I had no idea what it was. I didn't see any marketing for it until I looked it up. Lionsgate played this one really sort of subtle, and I can't figure out why. Because the Rotten Tomato score is in the 80s, 82% on Rotten Tomatoes. 86% audience score. Take it with a grain of salt, as I always say. And the cinema score of a B+. So it's a good movie. It's a good product. You kind of have to wonder why they wouldn't market this more. Like I said, I saw next to nothing in terms of marketing. The trailer's pretty good too. So the quality of the marketing seemed good. It's just they didn't. I don't know. I guess I'm not in the demographic, or maybe they didn't play at the festivals either. Deadline points that out, and it's I think it's just a bizarre release strategy from Lionsgate. I don't quite understand it. It opened up at 16. That's good. It's not it's not amazing. I think the expectation here, when you look at all the pieces combined, and Deadline brings this up, you're thinking, why is this not opening up a lot higher? Like, why isn't this opening up at like 22, 25, closing out at like well over 50, 60, maybe even $70 million? I think with the product quality here, that could have happened. I said it was going to open up at 14 to 15, so a little bit of a breakout. At the beginning of the fall, Hollywood Stock Exchange had it at $13 million opening weekend, closing out at 35. So it actually opened up at 16, so better than my sort of optimistic projection. And I don't know, this one, basically another studio executive said it's a word of mouth movie that will have great legs. That's probably true. I think in terms of the legs on this, you're looking at least 2.5x. The average is 2.7x usually for any average film. I think you're looking at least 3x for this. And you're looking at probably 48, 50 probably closes out at. If it gets to 50, that's a pretty good performance overall. But I think the expectation is this could easily done 60, 70 and on higher. I don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know why they decided to pull back on this. You have these 2 also massive stars that you get out there. I didn't really see them all that much promoting this movie either. So just bizarre marketing for this movie. In terms of who saw it, 67% female, 33% male, way over indexed on females compared to the average film. 68% over 25, 32% under 25, so that's pretty much in line with an average movie. No real over indexing there. 76% overall positive from post track at 3.5 stars. So I think the story in this one is a good performance, especially with its lackluster marketing campaign, and I think it's going to have good legs, but it does kind of feel like a lost opportunity here. For Paul Feig, Anna Kendrick, Blake Lively, and Lionsgate. It seemed like this should have been pushed more. It almost kind of seems like an October release to me. I think it came a little bit too early in the fall season. Maybe people will catch up with it later. Or maybe it's one of those movies that people are just going to wait for on VOD or Netflix or HBO whenever it premieres on that. But we'll keep it on it. But I expect the legs to be pretty darn good on A Simple Favor. So that was number 3. Number 4 was White Boy Rick from Studio 8, which is sort of like a Sony imprint. White Boy Rick did $8.8 million this weekend in 2,500 theaters. Per theater average was $3,500. This is a big misfire that if you're interested in like the background of this movie, check out Deadline's write-up for this weekend. They go deep into why what happened with this movie. It was basically their story is, long story short, it was really sought after, the script and the story. A lot of people were vying for it. Darren Aronofsky wanted to do this story. It ended up at Studio 8. It was played in the festivals, had really interesting marketing, but nobody showed up. It cost $30 million to make, by the way. That's not a small budget for what I consider an art flick. In terms of the audience reaction, Deadline has this line that, like, basically, this movie's really good, and the studio failed it, and the critics failed it because they didn't get it. That's just like a bizarre response to a movie like this, because when you look at the data, you have a 64% on 64% positive on post track. You have a very low recommend of 44%. So audiences don't necessarily like it that much. 64% Rotten Tomatoes score from critics, so that's like not terrible, but not great. For a movie like this, you'd need it to be well into the 80s, high 80s, if you wanted to break out as a smaller film. And then, the audience just wasn't there for it. And I don't think there was a lot of interest in the movie. I did see a fair amount of marketing for this, a lot more than I did for A Simple Favor. But it just didn't connect with people. Audience score is at 63% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know the cinema score. I'll have to look that up real quick. Audiences didn't show up. I think a lot of it has to do with the concept of it. Let's see. White Boy Rick did a B on the cinema score, which is, again, like, I'm looking back to it, like, this is an art flick. It's playing as an art flick. You put it in these festival circuits to get it some buzz. It seems arty, so you kind of have to play that angle on it. Now, you spent too much making it, right? This should have been probably done for $10 to $15 million production budget. But you had Matthew McConaughey in it, so it probably cost a lot. But I think the final product isn't as fantastic as Deadline makes it out to seem, and maybe it wasn't as good as the studio thought it was. 44% definite recommend is too low. Who showed up for it? 55% male, 45% female, so a little bit of an over-index on males. 70% over 25, 30% under 25. Now, for a movie about a younger man who gets caught up in organized crime and being a police informant and stuff like that, you would want the under 25 to over-index. And that's, I think, if I'm pointing out like a flaw maybe in the marketing or how they approached it here, the average film is 33% under 25, so it's below even the average movie. I would want that up in the 40% at least. I would want younger people out there seeing this movie. It's a crime drama. It's engaging. It's about a younger person. It just didn't have the cachet with the younger audiences, and I think that's one of the reasons why it didn't perform all that well. But if you want more details on that, do check out the Deadline write-up, because it does go pretty in-depth about the whole production of it and why they thought that it did not do very well. So that was number 4, White Boy Rick at 8.8 million. Number 5 was Crazy Rich Asians, sticking around, 8.7 million, a great 34% drop in its 5th weekend, stands at 149, almost $150 million total take for Crazy Rich Asians in its 5th weekend here. Starting to lose some theaters, lost about 500 theaters this weekend. When you're entering your second month run here, it's gonna start to fade a little bit. But that drop, I'm looking at the other drops this weekend, one of the better drops, and it's one of those movies that has, just through word of mouth and buzz and social media hype, has reached a certain level of excitement to it that people are going to keep showing up and seeing it, a month or two after it has been out in the theaters. So just a fantastic performance from Crazy Rich Asians, and it continues to do well. Number 6 was Peppermint. This in second weekend, did $6 million, a 55% drop. I thought this one was going to drop lower. because it played a little bit older female. It seems like the legs in those films tend to be a little bit better. I'm thinking like the Book Club and stuff like that. 55% second week, it's too high. It's just too high. Per theater average is at 2,000, so it's basically on that Mendoza line. Total take so far for Peppermint is $24 million total. So, it's an okay performance. I was really surprised that it did as well as it did last weekend, but now it's starting to fade pretty quickly here. Number 7 was The Meg, 3.8 million, a 38% drop. In its 6th weekend, it has done $137 million. Great performance from this one, but like I've said over the last few shows, despite the fact that it has done so well, the production budget was so massive at 130 that it's going to be definitely profitable, but it's not going to make like $200 million in profit. A smaller movie may have done that with a $40 million production budget, but at 130, it's going to break even and make a little bit of profit, but it's not going to be like a grand slam win for Warner Brothers. It's more of an avoidance of a big, massive flop is what happened there. Number 8 was Searching, one of my favorite movies of the fall. 3.2 million, 30% drop, great drop. It's in about 2,000 theaters. Per theater average, unfortunately, is at like 1,600, so it's not going to stick around all that long. Total take for Searching is 19.6 million in its 4th weekend. So a movie that has done okay. The production budget had to be tiny on this. I thought it was going to break out. It did not break out. I was wrong about that. I think it will have a great second life on VOD, streaming and the TV services and TV pay cable and stuff, but I was hoping maybe like a $30 million, $40 million take for that, and just not going to happen. It is worth it, though. I mean, it does deserve that. It's a great movie. If you do have a chance to check it out, it's talking about social media thrillers, noir. I mean, it's like right in that world. So number 9 this weekend was Unbroken, Path to Redemption, 2.3 million. This is a faith-based film. In 1,600 theaters. Per theater average in its opening weekend was below 1,500, 1,451 to be exact. Terrible performance. I mean, I don't know, whatever. It's a Christian flick. That's cool if that's your thing, and like that's a whole genre. Some of them do well, but this one just was not. It's not performing well. It's going to disappear almost immediately. Maybe its legs are going to be okay, but like I don't think it's going to matter. If you're opening below 1,500 per theater, no one wanted to see your movie, essentially, no matter if they're Christian or not. Okay, so number 10 was Mission Impossible Fallout, 2.3 million, a 40% drop. Total take so far, 216 million for Mission Impossible Fallout in its 8th weekend. It's now entered its 3rd month being out here. Okay, so that is the top 10. Anything outside the top 10 to talk about? Not too much. No real per theater averages that stick out to me that are fantastic. You have a lot of small movies opening in the fall, but nothing that really looks like it could take off. Movies that are like, let's see, Operation Finale's in its 3rd weekend. It's only at 16 million. Ant-Man and the Wasp is still sticking around in its 11th week. It's at $215 million, which is okay. Not a huge win, but an okay win. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is still around. 13th week. It's at $416 million. Incredibles 2 is still around in its 14th weekend. It's $605 million. Man, these summer movies just sticking around in the fall. Okay, that's mostly it. Nothing really else to talk about here with the top 10, top 20. Let's take a look at surprisingly not a lot of smaller releases. You usually think fall is like the limited to release time, but we're not really into Oscar season yet. Oscar season really kicks off in October. And then when we get October, then it just like really ramps up, obviously through December. December is where essentially all the Oscar movies kind of come out. Let's talk about next weekend. Fahrenheit 11/9 comes out at the beginning of the fall. That was listed at like a $9 million opening in Hollywood Stock Exchange. I said it's going to way overdo that. I think it's going to open at like 17. Also, we have Bob Woodward's book coming out. It's like the best-selling book of all time, Fear, about the Trump administration. So like things are just aligning. We're getting close to the election here. I saw like 6 political ads here for Tennessee, like governor, senator in a row this morning watching Meet the Press. So it's like, it's on. Like this is like, we're in the political horse race season right now. And so Fahrenheit 11.9 coming out, it's kind of really perfect timing. The problem is it's in a small release. It's only 1,500 theaters. From Briar Cliff is the distributor. I've never heard of them before. So I don't know. I think it's good. 17 seems really outrageous on only 1,500 theaters, but I'm gonna let it stand. It was my guess, so I'm gonna let it sit there. I think, if I want to update it, let's say it probably does what, 6,000 per theater on 1,500 theaters. Yeah, you're looking at like 9 million then. Okay, so like maybe the Hollywood Stock Exchange or initial guess is a little bit closer to what it's probably going to do, but I'm leaving my 17. I don't give a shit. I'm going to go see it. I'm going to love it. As a rabid liberal leftist as I am, I love Michael Moore. He's been around forever. He's been around since I was like a teenager doing this sort of stuff. Before that, since I was a kid. So really respect what he's doing. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to like, the real question is it going to do what the 9/11 movie did? Probably not, because that came out in 2004, right before the election. That was Bush-Kerry back then. I don't think it's going to make anywhere near that much, but I don't know. You never know, because we're in a really weird time right now, so it could do fantastic. Also coming out next weekend, The House with a Clock in Its Walls. That was looking at like $17 million at the beginning of the fall. I said 18, right in line with that. I think that still seems pretty in the zone, in the ballpark. It's opening in 3,300 theaters, so that's a pretty big opening. I think that number should be pretty doable. Also coming out is Life Itself, which I don't even know. What's interesting? That was not listed in my fall movie preview. I'm not really sure why. I don't think maybe it was on the schedule. Life Itself is from Amazon Studios. Oscar Isaac, Olivia Wilde. It has a very like the trailers and stuff are like self-righteous and like over the top. It just seems so overwrought that I can't see it doing all that well. But it's so schlocky that it might connect with people. So I don't know. 2,500 theaters is a pretty big opening for this Amazon Studios movie. I have no idea what it's going to do. I'm probably under 10, I would say. I don't see it doing over 10. $10 million divided by 2,500 theaters. What's that per theater average? 4,000? Seems about right. If it's lucky, it'll do 4,000 per theater. Probably more like 3,500, 3,600 per theater. I don't see it doing all that well. So I think next weekend, the winner's probably going to be House with a Clock in Its Walls, because Predator is going to drop off the face of the earth. And then maybe Fahrenheit. I don't know. We'll see. And then the end of September is coming up pretty quick here. Hellfest is coming out the 28th. Little Women, Night School, Smallfoot. I think Night School is going to do very well. I think Hellfest is going to disappear almost immediately. I'm not seeing any limited releases that really stick out to me. Nothing that I've heard any sort of Oscar buzz about. Okay. Into early October then we're talking about Star is Born and Venom, which are 2 movies that I think obviously I've already told you, I've totally misread A Star is Born. I didn't know Lady Gaga was in it. I think her real name was on the call sheet, and I didn't know anything about the movie. And so that one's going to be massive. I don't know how massive. I have no idea. But I was talking like maybe 15 million. What did I say in my fall movie review? I'm such an idiot. I said $17 million. No, it's going to open at like $40-50 million. It's going to be huge. The buzz is off the charts from Toronto and I think Venice. So it's going to do very well. Venom looks worse and worse as time goes on. The latest trailer that came out was a train wreck. It reminds me a lot of Predator, to be honest with you. It was tracking at 51 at the start of the fall. I said, I don't think so, 45. I'm thinking it might go lower. I'm thinking they're looking at like maybe mid-30s opening for that, if that, though. But I don't know. I'm usually wrong about comic book movies, so I could be wrong about that one. And then you get further into October, Bad Times at El Royale. That's a wide release thriller. I think it's noir, essentially. That could do okay. First Man comes out October 12th as well. That will be huge. and then Goosebumps 2 comes out, and then we kind of get closer into the Halloween season. I think the biggest winner, if I'm just looking at the fall so far and the first couple of weeks here, I think the biggest winner from the early fall performance is probably going to be the Halloween movie. This is because Predator's underperformance kind of like helps that. I don't know how it helps it, just as my head, it seems like it's going to help that movie do better. The Nun popping off shows us that like horror is stronger than ever it's ever been, probably as a genre is right now. And so I think that really speaks well for Halloween. And some of the early reactions were good, but you can't tell if it's like plants or whatever, or just people are really excited about the nostalgia or meeting Jamie Lee Curtis. Okay, so anyways, that is the show for today. I will be back next weekend to talk about how Fahrenheit, House with the Clock in its Walls, and Life Itself do at the theater, and see how far the Predator drops. I'm guessing right now, 60%. I think it's going to be a disaster. In any event, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildland Podcast.